General Hospital spoilers for reveal that the seismic shock of Britt Westbourne's return is not merely a twist in the narrative fabric of Port Charles, it is a cataclysm ripping through every carefully concealed lie. Every unspoken trauma, and every power dynamic that once felt unshakable. Her reappearance does not come with grace or quiet redemption, it comes screaming through the undercurrents of conspiracy, torment, and blood-soaked revenge. For months, perhaps years, Britt has not been dead, but rather imprisoned. Tortured emotionally and perhaps physically by the enigmatic and increasingly dangerous Vaughn, whose web of manipulation has begun to unravel. Vaughn didn't just hide Britt from the world. He erased her voice, her choices, and her truth. But the silence he tried to impose has shattered. Britt's return is not as a victim, but as a storm, furious, fractured, and determined to expose the truths that others have buried to protect their own legacies. Vaughn's motives are tangled in obsession, power, and psychological possession. He didn't just want to hold Britt captive, he wanted to own her narrative, to use her as a pawn in a larger game that perhaps only he understood. Whether it was revenge against Jason, leverage against Liesl, or a twisted attempt to control those closest to her, Vaughn's actions have ignited a fire that can no longer be contained. Now that Britt has broken free, or been rescued, the cost of Vaughn's crimes is about to be paid in full. And Port Charles will be forced to reckon with the moral decay that allowed someone like him to operate unchecked. What no one realizes yet is that Britt's return will have cascading consequences that touch nearly every character in town. Jason Morgan, already haunted by grief, will be thrust into a maelstrom of guilt and longing as he realizes the woman he once loved was alive while he mourned her. His allegiance to Sunny, his role in the underworld, and his identity as both protector and executioner will be put to the test as Britt's truth contradicts everything he thought he knew. Liesl Albrecht, a woman who has endured the violent losses of both Nathan and Britt, will be emotionally detonated by the realization that her daughter was taken from her not by fate, but by calculated evil. And if Liesl is freed or finds a way to escape from prison, her vengeance will know no bounds. The most terrifying possibility? Britt may not have returned alone. Her time in captivity may have exposed her to secrets that could destroy reputations and unravel alliances. She may carry knowledge about underground experiments involving human cloning, secret pregnancies, or Vaughn's potential involvement with Sidwell or Dalton. If Britt knows about the real fate of Daisy, or what truly happened to Rocco's sibling, then her silence could shatter everything Michael, Sasha, and even Willow thought they were protecting. Vaughn may have used Britt to threaten the future of the children of Port Charles, experimenting with psychological manipulation or worse. If Daisy was ever part of Vaughn's plan, or if Britt was forced to watch as Vaughn targeted innocent lives for leverage, then her return signals a reckoning that not even GH's power players are prepared for. Britt's resurrection also rewrites the rules for those currently engaged in their own private wars. Brooke Lynn's campaign to destroy Lulu may suddenly be reframed by revelations from Britt's past, especially if the old feud between Britt and Lulu wasn't as resolved as people believed. If Britt reveals that Lulu betrayed her in the past, or if there was a baby involved that no one knew about, then Brooke Lynn might find a new ally in her battle for Geo. And what of Cody and Ava? If their flirtations were part of a larger manipulation crafted by Vaughn or connected to the same network that imprisoned Britt, then their entire relationship is about to implode. The chaos Britt brings isn't only emotional, it's structural. Every courtroom, every lab, every office within General Hospital may become a battleground for truth and justice. Vaughn may still hold dangerous secrets that could blackmail Jason, sabotage Michael's custody of Wiley, or even place Sunny back on trial. If Britt testifies, or if she brings evidence with her, then everything Sidwell, Drew, and even Carly have built could come crashing down. And as for Britt herself, her trauma will not fade quietly. She may suffer from PTSD, from memory loss, from the scars of being silenced too long. But she will not be silent anymore. Her presence will reignite old alliances, destroy fragile trust, and set fire to every false peace that Port Charles has built in her absence. The question now isn't just how Britt survived. The question is, what did she become while no one was watching? And how much destruction will it take before she feels whole again? Britt's return isn't just a plot twist. It's a declaration of war, and the city will never recover. If Britt does return to Port Charles but with no memory of who she is or who she once loved, then her homecoming will not be a moment of relief, but the beginning of a psychological and emotional horror for everyone who ever cared about her. For Jason, the man who risked everything to find her. The woman who once held a complicated but undeniable place in his heart is no longer recognizable. Her eyes, once fierce and intelligent, now look through him as if he were a stranger, or worse, a threat. And that, more than any bullet or betrayal, might be the most devastating blow of all. But this isn't just about memory loss. The implications are far darker. What if Vaughn didn't just imprison Britt? What if he reconditioned her? What if, during her months of absence, he subjected her to pharmaceutical experiments, neurological rewiring, or psychological manipulation that erased her identity and replaced it with something else entirely? Port Charles may not be welcoming back a lost daughter, but a time bomb in human form, one who doesn't realize that every step she takes back into her old life is laced with landmines of confusion, rage, and danger. Imagine Britt walking through the halls of General Hospital, her past erased but her instincts still sharp, misinterpreting every friendly face as an enemy, every familiar touch as a trap. Her relationships, her mother Liesel, her bond with Maxie, her once budding love with Jason, all obliterated by an invisible war waged inside her own mind. And worse still, if any attempts to remind her of who she is trigger violent outbursts or psychic collapse, then those closest to her will be forced to make an impossible choice: help her recover, or protect the town from what she might become. Jason, in particular, will be haunted by guilt. He once failed to keep her safe, and now that he's brought her home, she may be even more lost than when she was presumed dead. If she looks at him with fear instead of love, if she attacks him out of trauma instead of remembering their connection, it will shatter him in ways that no battlefield ever could. And if he begins to suspect that Britt has been weaponized, that some part of Vaughn's scheme still lives inside her, he'll face a cruel dilemma. Destroy the threat or fight to save the woman he still believes exists beneath the programming. Jocelyn, having accompanied Jason on the mission to rescue Britt, will also face emotional fallout. She was prepared for physical danger, not the emotional labyrinth that now lies ahead. Watching Britt flinch at every gesture of kindness, twist every word into a threat, and possibly collapse into seizures or violent rage whenever her past is mentioned will ignite Joss's own trauma. And if Britt begins making cryptic allusions to secrets Vaughn whispered to her in the dark, secrets involving the Corinthos family, General Hospital's corruption, or betrayals yet to be revealed, Jocelyn may be forced to ask questions she's not ready to answer. Meanwhile, the rest of Port Charles won't know how to react. Liesel will be devastated, possibly even angry, believing the daughter she loved has been irreversibly broken. Maxie will try to reach through the fog with memories of laughter and friendship, only to be pushed away violently. And if Britt begins to hint that she was never alone in captivity, that others were experimented on, including names like Sasha, Daisy, or even someone like Rocco, then the panic will spread. The town won't just be on edge. It will be primed for chaos. But perhaps the most terrifying possibility is that Britt's mind hasn't been erased but rewritten, programmed to carry out an act so heinous, so strategically catastrophic, that even she doesn't know what it is until it's too late. What if Vaughn, anticipating his own downfall, embedded a trigger in her mind, something that, when activated by a word, a location, or a face, causes her to act against her will? A moment of lost time. A scalpel turned against the wrong patient. A whispered name that causes her to collapse in agony. And if she's unaware of it, then the danger becomes even more impossible to detect. Jason will likely resist the idea that Britt is a threat, clinging to the belief that the woman he remembers is still somewhere inside her. But if the body count rises, if evidence mounts that Britt's return coincides with a series of strange events, hacked hospital records, vanishing patients, sabotaged operations, then even Jason may be forced to accept a truth he never wanted to face: the woman he saved might be the instrument of their undoing, complicating matters even further. Britt's fragmented psyche may allow her to be manipulated once again, possibly by new enemies like Sidwell or even Michael, whose recent descent into moral gray areas is accelerating. If someone realizes they can control Britt, if they discover the psychological triggers Vaughn left behind, they could use her as a pawn in a much bigger game. A pawn who doesn't even realize she's being moved across a board of betrayal, revenge, and retribution. And as the battle lines begin to form, Britt may find herself caught between factions she doesn't remember, haunted by dreams she can't explain, and stalked by shadows of who she used to be. Her journey to reclaim her identity won't be a path of healing, it will be a battlefield strewn with emotional landmines, psychological traps, and the lingering fingerprints of a man who saw her not as a person, but as an experiment. The town will be forced to ask, can Britt be saved? Or is the woman they loved now just a ghost with a heartbeat? Because if memory is the soul of identity, and Vaughn has stolen Britt's, then the war for her recovery isn't just medical, it's existential. And in trying to save her, Jason and Jocelyn may find themselves not only fighting for her future, but for their own sanity. Jason will fight through fire and blood to rescue Britt, and against all odds, he will succeed in bringing her back to Port Charles. But the woman he returns with is no longer the same Britt the world once knew. The shadows of captivity linger in her eyes. And whatever Vaughn did to her mind and spirit cannot be undone with a simple reunion. Britt will walk back into her former life like a ticking time bomb, full of fractured memories, untamed rage, and disjointed emotional responses that she can't fully understand. Jason might believe that saving her was the end of the battle, but in truth, it was only the beginning of a far more dangerous war. One not waged with weapons but with psychological landmines, buried deep within Britt's soul. Her erratic behavior begins slowly. Small lapses in memory, trembling hands during hospital rounds. Nightmares that wake her up screaming. But soon, things escalate. She lashes out without warning, accusing people of betrayal and cruelty they never committed. She storms into rooms that she believes are filled with enemies. And worst of all, she begins to fixate on Drew and Willow's upcoming wedding, speaking of it as though it's the source of all her pain. Her fear, her fury. She whispers about how nothing should go forward, how the people who once turned their backs on her deserve chaos, not celebration. At first, it sounds like emotional trauma. But it soon becomes clear, Britt is unraveling. Jason tries to calm her, to ground her in reality, but she becomes unpredictable even around him. She accuses him of hiding things from her, of being part of the machine that broke her. There are moments when she screams at him in languages she never spoke before. Times when her hands shake as if trying to resist commands only she can hear. Jason fears that Vaughn embedded something deeper into Britt's psyche, something that isn't just trauma, but programming. A mission. A purpose. And it's locked behind a wall of confusion and agony that Britt herself cannot penetrate. Britt begins to wander the halls of the hospital at night, muttering fragments of conversations she shouldn't know, scribbling patterns and codes that seem meaningless until someone connects them to classified documents about WSB operations. She speaks about Daisy and Scout and at the target in ways that chill even the most hardened doctors. And then, without warning, she disappears for 24 hours. When she returns, there's blood on her hands and dirt on her clothes, but she refuses to explain where she was. It's the moment that Port Charles begins to realize. Britt didn't just come back broken, she came back dangerous. And her danger takes a horrifying turn when she crashes the wedding of Drew and Willow, on what should have been a day of peace and healing. Britt arrives like a storm, eyes wild, voice shaking, screaming about secrets buried in the altar, about betrayal standing at the center of the aisle. She grabs a ceremonial candle and hurls it at the stained glass window, shattering light and silence in one blow. The guests panic. Drew tries to intervene, but Britt shoves him aside with more force than anyone thought her capable of. And then she turns to Willow and says words no one can forget, "He's not who you think he is." It's not just a ruined wedding, it's a public collapse, a total breakdown, a moment that confirms Britt is a threat not just to herself, but to everyone around her. But in that moment, Jason doesn't run. He doesn't arrest her or sedate her. He steps forward and embraces her, pulling her into his arms as she screams and cries and claws at the world around her. Whispering promises that he'll fix it, that he won't let her be taken again. It's a heartbreaking image, the strongest man in Port Charles holding a woman the world no longer understands. But damage has been done. The wedding is cancelled. Rumors swirl. Nina, who was already wary of the ceremony, begins to suspect that Britt's breakdown was more than just PTSD. It may have been a calculated warning. Sunny grows suspicious that Drew's secrets go deeper than anyone knew. Sasha fears for Daisy's safety and begins making arrangements to leave town. And Jason? He becomes consumed by the need to figure out what Britt has become, and whether she can be saved before something even worse happens. Because as Britt paces her room at the edge of dawn, whispering names that don't belong to any living soul, sketching chemical formulas she doesn't understand, and writing, "Stop the wedding," over and over again on the wall. One thing becomes terrifyingly clear, the storm is far from over. And Port Charles may never be the same again. Britt's return to Port Charles is no longer a moment of celebration. It has become the epicenter of a psychological and emotional earthquake that is slowly tearing through the foundations of the lives around her. Once presumed dead and lost forever, Britt has re-emerged not as a symbol of survival but as a storm of contradictions, trauma, and instability. Her arrival has not just shocked those who loved her. It has upended every truth they thought they knew. Jason, once her protector and perhaps her greatest regret, finds himself locked in an emotional prison of responsibility and guilt. Cody, whose past feelings for Britt had once been masked under humor and recklessness, is now confronting the raw intensity of what he's been denying for far too long. And in the middle of all this, Britt stands shattered, dangerous, and unpredictable, a mirror reflecting everyone's deepest fears and unfinished stories. The trauma Britt endured in captivity is still cloaked in mystery. But its symptoms are painfully obvious. She speaks in riddles, forgets where she is, and then suddenly remembers entire conversations no one else recalls. Her behavior oscillates violently, one moment fragile and loving, the next cold and aggressive. Her mind seems to flicker between timelines, realities, or perhaps implanted memories, leaving her anchored to nothing and no one. There are whispers that Vaughn may have done something far worse than imprisonment, that perhaps experimentation was involved. There are suggestions that Britt was chemically altered, brainwashed, or psychologically reconditioned to serve as something more than just a prisoner. If true, then the woman Jason and Cody are trying to save may no longer even exist, not in the way they remember. Jason throws himself into helping her with the fervor of a man trying to undo a cosmic mistake. He wasn't there when she was taken. He failed to keep her safe. And now, with every conversation, every whispered plea, every failed attempt to bring her back to clarity, he is punished by that failure. He sets up security around her, calls in specialists, and keeps vigil outside her door, but still, he cannot reach her, not truly. Sometimes she calls him by a different name. Sometimes she pushes him away violently. And worst of all, sometimes she looks right through him, as if he were never real to begin with. Cody, on the other hand, doesn't try to restore the past. He simply meets Britt where she is now. He makes jokes, brings her strange gifts, distracts her with meaningless games, and pretends, just for a moment, that she isn't haunted. And somehow, in those moments, Britt smiles. She laughs. She breathes. Cody gives her a fragment of peace in a mind that no longer trusts itself. And for that, Jason grows quietly resentful. The unspoken rivalry between them, once buried beneath shared concern, starts to boil. Each man wants to be the one who pulls Britt out of the darkness. But each fears that they may lose her in the process, to the other man, or worse, to herself. But love is not the only force at play here. There are deeper, more sinister threads winding through this unraveling. Britt has started to experience visions, symbols, formulas, phrases in languages she never studied. She sketches diagrams in her sleep, mumbles about purity and correction, and sometimes walks to places she shouldn't know exist. Jason begins to suspect that Britt's time in Vaughn's custody wasn't passive. That she may have been groomed, reprogrammed, weaponized. And if that is true, then Port Charles may not be safe. Not from her. Not from the secrets locked inside her mind. The real horror begins when Britt, in a moment of lucidity, insists on attending Drew and Willow's wedding. Jason tries to stop her. Cody begs her to rest. But she insists. Claiming that something is going to happen at the ceremony, that she needs to be there when it all falls apart. And she is right. Because the wedding, already strained by secrets and unresolved trauma, becomes the stage for Britt's unraveling. Dressed in red, she walks down the aisle in silence. Eyes scanning the guests like a predator calculating her next move. Jason follows behind her, eyes wide with dread. Cody waits in the back, ready to intervene. Britt stands silently during the vows. And just as Willow reaches for Drew's hands, Britt begins to laugh. Not soft, not sweet, manic. Her voice echoes off the chapel walls as she screams, "You're marrying a ghost. You're marrying a traitor. You're all already dead and just don't know it." The room explodes into panic. Guests scream. Jason rushes forward, but Britt collapses. Cody catches her, whispering her name, but she doesn't respond. She's trembling, her eyes wide with terror, her mouth forming words that no one can understand. Jason realizes then that Britt is not just traumatized, she is programmed. And something inside her has been triggered. A buried command, a psychological tripwire. Something so carefully hidden that not even she knew it existed until now. The fallout is catastrophic. The wedding is cancelled. Drew is furious. Willow is shaken. And Britt? Britt is taken to a secured location where doctors will try to untangle what Vaughn has done to her. But Jason knows the truth. This is just the beginning. Because Britt's story is no longer about recovery, it is about revelation. Every day she remembers more, not just about herself, but about what she was meant to do. She talks about cleansing. About the virus, about the cure. Jason realizes with horror that Britt may be part of something bigger, a biopsychological plan Vaughn intended to unleash, using her as the carrier. And if he's right, then the battle to save Britt is not about bringing her back to the woman they loved, it's about preventing the woman she's becoming. And in the middle of it all stands Jason. Torn between protecting her and stopping her, between love and duty, between the man he was and the man he must become. Because if Britt loses herself completely, then Port Charles may lose far more than just a broken heart. It may lose everything.